Good morning, friends. Today I am going to talk about a brief background to the modern poetry. This background is essential in order to have a proper understanding of modern poetry. To begin with, modern poetry that arose in 20th century, the first half, along with fiction, drama too. The seed of this modernity, new sensibility, new approach has already been sown in the preceding age, that is, Victorian era. Now, when you go back to the last century, that is, last to 20th, 19th century, we have certain writers, certain writings which proved seminal in shaping the form of modern age, modern times. To begin with, Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold is one of those poets of Victorian age who has given voice to the kind of fragmentation, disintegration, futility, anarchy, disbelief, and when we read his criticism, he talks about how in these crucial times science has failed, religion has failed too, and the greatest responsibility of literature springs from these failures. And if you go and read his poem, especially Dover Beach, the way in that poem Matthew Arnold talks about no hope, no certitude, no peace, all broken. And he compares people like ignorant armies who clash by night. These lines best sum up the kind of disintegration, the kind of disillusionment which we find in modern times, in modern poetry of modernist era of first half of 20th century. Charles Darwin, another important name, who came up with his most famous book on the origin of species. In that book, he came up with the idea that we, the human beings, have no relationship with God. And through his scientific temperament, he tried to prove that we all have come from monkeys, apes. Think about this. We have Albert Einstein and his concept, theory of relativity, which doesn't believe in universality, which doesn't believe in truth making process in terms of certain fixities. It's alterable, it's changeable. Who can forget Friedrich Nietzsche, who pronounced that God is dead? Modern age of first half of 20th century is the age of disintegration and anxiety. And this disintegration and anxiety, this anarchy, this fragmentation is due to several things. And the first and foremost is the industrialization. This industrialization created a rupture in traditional folk life. Setting up of industries created cities. Cowper says, God made the country, man made the town. You can well think of the impact of industry, how it brought cities and it created a dent in folk life, community life, fragmentation of family structure, emergence of nuclear families, breaking of joint families. World War First. Think about World War First. What did it do? It simply presented to us, displayed to us a bizarre face. A face that is terrible. Millions of people died with a single command. For what? For the glory of the nation, for the pride of the nation. But certainly, I wonder whether that glory or pride is achieved or not. But this World War again created a heavy dent in the basic fabric lifestyle of cool, calm, comfortable social structure. And the result is rupture. Religious crisis. We have already discussed Matthew Arnold, Charles Darwin, who simply give a fresh jolt to our religious beliefs and integrities. In plural, if we can talk about integrity that way. God is not there. Niche. God is dead. Think about. So far, God has been the central figure. He has been there for every now and then, good and bad, success and failures. He was there. But we are told that God is dead. The God, omniscient, omnipresent, immortal, even he has been brought to the realm of mundane perceptions. So, religious crisis, industrialization, world war, religious crisis, they all led to the alienation of human beings. first from God, but God is dead. Then to society, but society is fragmented now. It's broken to pieces. It has no adhesive. It has no inherent structure. Structureless. Structureless is the new structure. Family, joint families, big family bond that is into question. And finally, no God, no society, no family, a kind of disbelief, a kind of distrust in one's own self too. The moral chaos that resulted from various movements, especially the call for the emancipation, freedom, liberty of women. It might be, looking at this phenomenon from 21st century perspective, it might feel a little uneasy. But when you think of this in terms of 20th century, then only you can think of what was the worldview of women and how the movements related to the emancipation and liberty of women resulted into sexual freedom. Sexual freedom, that is, to have sexual relationship, a man with many women and a woman with many men. And the very act of sex, which must be canonized, which must be taken as a sacred act, that has been degenerated into the acts as animals do. Simply enjoyment, copulation, no spirituality, no sacredness attached. This is an age of revolutionary ideas too. To begin with, let us talk about Marxism. Marxism and the idea of that in terms of the concept of base and superstructure. There have been one prevalent way to look at history. Marxism gave a new alternative to look at history. History is not merely the annals, the accounts, and the chronology or the sequences of the achievements of wars of great kings and emperors. It is about class struggle. Two classes, bourgeois elite and second proletariat, downtrodden, working class, labor class. Marxism gave the idea that how every basic human affair is woven around, centered around money, finance, economic affairs, peace. And this determines superstructure, other relationships, other structures. According to Marx, every civilization has had the bloody wars between bourgeois and proletariat. Every civilization, as it is reported, is not linear, developmental, progressive. Rather, it is fraught with discontinuity. This is what Marx has tried to opine in terms of Marxism, and it has a good amount of impression on literary writings, not only of modern days, modern times of first half of 20th century, but even of later times, say it, second half of 20th century, or even 21st century, or even centuries to go. Einstein, we have already discussed Einstein in terms of his contributions. Apart from that famous E equal to mc square, his concepts like theory of relativity and the idea which I was talking in terms of Marxism, there is no continuity, there is no solidity, and there is no causality in nature. Henrik Bergson, the philosopher who came up with his idea of psychological time, thisness of time, and the psychological conception of time is opposed to the mechanical conception of time. Mechanical aspects of time refer to 9 to 12, 12 to 3, maybe in a chronological sequence, one by one, tick tock, tick tock. But psychological aspects, as Bergson theorizes that, he talks about the concept of duty, that is thisness. And this thisness is that moment where past and future come into a kind of togetherness. While sitting here in this class, in this room, with the help of my mind, brain, I can well go in the past, or I can just bring past into present. I can go into the future, or I can bring future into the present. Thisness, this time-space continuum, this has a lasting impression, especially when you read the novels of this time, especially the novels based on the technique of stream of consciousness. We are talking about psychology, then how can we remain aloof from psychological insights? William James's the book, The Principles of Psychology. In this book, he talks about stream of consciousness, as I mentioned in the last slide. C.G. Jung and his concepts of personal conscious, personal unconscious, collective unconscious, shadow, persona, anima, animus. Sigmund Freud, the most revered, controversial psychologist, who came up with the idea of the division of the consciousness in terms of conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. He also talks about id, ego, and superego. He also refers to sexual desire to be the primary motive behind every human act. Sigmund Freud, his concept of penis envy, which has been very controversial, they must be read, understood properly. Interpretation of history. I was talking about Einstein and the way he considers natural processes to be discontinuous, to be fluid, unpredictable. So is the case of history. Discontinuous history, fragmented history. And this discontinuity has well been explicated by Michel Foucault later on. So history is not something which is exclusive, fixed, linear, progressive, developmental. Rather, history, as Giambattista Vico opines, is cyclical. As we see, cycle of nature, cycle of life, so is the case of history. Recurrence. The concept of 3D, develop, decline, demise. And this is very influential when you read W.B. Yeats and his book A Vision, especially when he talks about Christian civilization and how Christian civilization has come to an end, and where he considers each civilization of having 2000 years of span. In this connection, again, when I shall be talking about T.S. Eliot in details, in the light of his text, his magnum opus, The Wasteland, mythical method, mythical perspective that talks about recurrence, cyclical aspect. And we have several writers talking about that, especially when you read James George Frazer, The Golden Bough, where Spengler, in his most famous book, The Decline of the West, which one must keep in mind to understand the kind of is first half of 20th century was. And this is essential. This is not only about first half of 20th century. It is about succeeding years, discourses, worldviews, which often take their pith and sap from these. I hope the components which I tried to describe must be of some help to you. With this, thank you.